This video is sponsored by Warby Parker. Gladiator 2 is an interesting challenge for Ridley Scott, coming off of a stretch of films that have been widely panned by critics, and many questioning if he can ever get back on track. Despite being 86 years old, Ridley Scott still has one of the fastest feature film outputs in the industry, with 8 films in the last 10 years, and 6 more upcoming films scheduled, and talk of another Alien sequel in his future. So if anyone expected him to slow down or not go big for Gladiator 2, you'd be mistaken. From massive Coliseum sets, crazier gladiator battles, and turning 8 kilometers of Malta into ancient Rome, this is a production that designer Arthur Max described as Gladiator on steroids. So grab your swords and sandals as we jump into the incredible production of Gladiator 2 and see if Ridley Scott still has it. Development on Gladiator 2 began in 2001, only a year after the original film made its way to cinemas, with an initial script being completed by mid-2003, focusing on the character of Lucius, the child of the original film's protagonist Maximus and descendant of Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. The story had some rather strange elements, including a supernatural tone where Maximus would rise from the dead based on a Roman myth. Maximus did die in the first Gladiator, explained Walter Parks, a producer connected with Gladiator 2 back in 2002. But the Romans had a great belief in the afterlife. Russell is exploring some ideas on how to come back. Russell Crowe seemed fairly interested in returning to play the role of Maximus, and there were even talks of including some backstory of Lucius. And most of all, they really wanted to bring back a certain director, Ridley Scott, into the fold. But Ridley Scott wanted to move away from gladiators to focus on Roman politics, focusing on themes of conflict and portraying the new Rome Lucius is fighting against as a fascist state. The film was also said to not be a conventional sequel, with the story jumping in time to segments before and after the original Gladiator. And somewhere along the way, Ridley won out and announced on September 11th, 2003 that it's written. Scott revealed of the script by John Logan, "We've already done quite a lot of work and the draft's in now. The target would be early 2005. At this point, Scott would confirm that Russell Crowe would not be returning and that it's the next generation. Roman history is so exotic that any part of it is really fascinating. History is far more exotic than anything you can dream up. The film will take the next step, which is the sun." But from here, the film didn't go into production. Instead, a tussle over the script developed over 3 years with competing alternate proposals and themes. One that we know of was called Christ Killer, and heavily emphasized the supernatural elements, with the focus of the plot being around Maximus. In this version, he was tasked by Rome's pantheon of gods with killing Jesus. Then he lives all the way up to modern day as an immortal being after being tricked into killing Lucius, going through various moments in history until he ended up working in the modern day Pentagon. This honestly sounds like the opening to Wolverine Origins, if I'm being honest. This script, developed by writer Nick Cave, gave Ridley Scott some pause. It's too grand. Nick is very high theater, and Steven Spielberg said, nah. I wasn't confident about what we had actually put together, so I just let it go. In the middle of these strange supernatural versions of the story, DreamWorks, which held the Gladiator rights, was bought out by Paramount in 2006, and Paramount ended up just shelving the Gladiator series. This left Gladiator on ice for a whole decade with no work going into the film. Writers were afraid to take it on, said Ridley Scott. But Ridley Scott also would move on to various other projects. And as he said, frankly, we were all busy, so honestly, no one really thought about making it. But the idea of a Gladiator follow-up remained in the back of Ridley Scott's mind over the years, and whispers of which seemed to emerge when in talk of promoting Alien Covenant.
But I can bring him back. I know how to bring him back. I talked him into how I bring him back. I used the portal of a dying warrior as a portal that could bring somebody back.
But it wasn't until late 2018 that Paramount had agreed to back the project, after Scott proposed to work on it alongside Peter Craig, a screenwriter involved with, among other things, the Hunger Games franchise. The script was developed in between Scott's work on his other films, The Last Duel and House of Gucci, and Scott confirmed its completion in a late 2021 interview, with production waiting until he had completed his next project, then known as Kit Bag, which later was released in 2023 as Napoleon. The story would revolve around Lucius, who was sent away to Africa after the events of Gladiator, but later on is captured by Romans and returns to Rome as a slave to fight on in the arena. His mother has since lived on in Rome, but mostly as a political prisoner of sorts, who is used as a political pawn of sorts, as she is the last known remaining heir of a famous dynasty. Ridley Scott would then go on a casting spree, bringing on Paul Mescal in January 2023 to play the role of Lucius. Others considered for the role were Austin Butler, Richard Madden, and Miles Teller. One interesting aspect of Paul Mescal being cast for this role is that Ridley Scott thought he resembled Richard Harris, who played Marcus Aurelius in the original Gladiator film. But beyond that, this follows the trend of Ridley Scott casting fairly newcomer actors to play significant roles in his films. Barry Keoghan was originally cast to play the Emperor, but would have to pull out due to scheduling conflicts with his role in Saltburn, though there were some rumors that he was outright fired from the film. But Ridley Scott would say, Barry is one of the good ones, the same level as Joaquin Phoenix and Paul Mescal, while also noting that Saltburn was the best film I've seen this year.
Blessed Father, watch over my wife and son. Whisper to them that I live only to hold them again.
Well, what do we have here? Oh, the orders? Thank you. Well, the orders say that you are to be set free. Let him go. Where am I?
You're in another Ridley Scott universe. We had to bring you here because your bad vision is threatening the Ridley Scott cinematic timeline.
I guess that makes sense, but where am I supposed to shop for glasses?
Well, thanks to our sponsor Warby Parker, it's easy to find great options for eyeglasses, sunglasses, contact lenses, all available online that can be delivered straight to you. Warby Parker offers a variety of quality frames that they design in-house and are super affordable, starting at $95 for prescription glasses. In fact, Frame Voyager has been using Warby Parker glasses for years.
Who's Frame Voyager?
The person editing us to say all of this. Just ignore him. But if you don't know which frame to get, order 5 pairs of glasses with the home try-on quiz, and Warby Parker will send them to you for free to try on. You can do that now through the QR code on the screen or through the link in the video description.
I think I found the glasses I like.
Great. Let's get you back so you don't screw up the timeline of great Ridley Scott films we'd miss out on, like House of Gucci, Napoleon, Exodus, Gods and Kings, and Robin Hood.
I can read now. It says you are to be executed. What? No.
Production would be set to begin in May of 2023, and just like in the first Gladiator film, they would be filming in Morocco, which is often referred to as the gateway to the Sahara Desert. The Sun noted in an article that this area is building a reputation as a favorite site for movie makers due to its dramatic landscapes. And the dramatic landscape wasn't the only thing causing drama on June 7th. As a fire stunt would go wrong, and people near the scene said it sounded like a gas pipe on the set may have ruptured. Reportedly, 4 to 6 members of the stunt crew were brought to a local hospital, and Paramount would later clear this up, saying, while filming a planned stunt sequence on the set of the Gladiator sequel, an accident occurred during which several crew members experienced non-life-threatening injuries. We will continue monitoring the situation and taking all necessary precautions as we resume production. After this non-answer from Paramount, they did resume production, but would get shut down again during the writers and actors strike in July of 2023, before continuing again later on in the year. If you watched our episode on the production of the first Gladiator film, you'll remember the camera techniques brought over from Saving Private Ryan by cinematographer John Matheson. With a 45-degree shutter angle and a low frame rate, they created a smeary and choppy look to some of the battle sequences, which if we look at other films in that era, was a bit of a trend, with Lord of the Rings also utilizing this technique, even if a bit different. It would appear, though, this turn-of-the-century technique will not be returning to this film, but John Matheson is returning to his role as the director of cinematography, though this time with a very different setup than from 25 years ago.
He had, what, 12, 15 cameras everywhere, and in most of the scenes, especially when we were up there, they gave us plenty of room. So you felt, I guess there were cameras up there sometime, but they were at a distance.
This multi-camera setup should sound very familiar to longtime viewers of the channel, as just last year Ridley Scott talked about how he was able to film movies faster utilizing a crazy multi-camera approach, something that he says he has slowly realized is faster over the course of his career.
I discovered in recent years, actually 20 years ago, that 2 cameras are twice as fast, 4 cameras are 4, and 6 and 8 cameras are 8 times faster. So you're scheduling a scene for the day. I'll be finished at 11 o'clock.
For Napoleon, he said that this approach took down the filming schedule for certain complicated battle sequences down from a month to only 6 days. And for Gladiator, Scott said, I'm doing Gladiator 2 now in 54 days because I'm not doing 50 takes with one camera on one shot and then turning around. This normal fight scene that could take anything up to a month, I'll take 6 days. So the savings are colossal. But while this technique was great for fast-paced production, some of the actors also really took to it as well, with Fred Hetchinger remarking that the 8 cameras reminds me of theater because you have an entire environment that's created in camera. Because when you got the right take and were in a special moment, you were able to capture that performance from various angles. Other actors were surprised you could even figure out how to use 8 cameras at once on set, with Joseph Quinn saying, I was like, 8 cameras? And he's like, you gotta know where to put them. Clearly, he does. Watching that puzzle, watching him harness all of those pieces and put them together was fascinating. Truly. Ridley Scott would comment on this saying, I can capture Paul's entrance into the Colosseum in 2 takes as opposed to it taking all day. You have to know exactly where to place the cameras. I can do that because I've storyboarded it all in advance. For even the best camera operator, it can be hell. I don't rehearse with the actors, but I do rehearse with the camera operators, and I dress them on costume on set because they could end up in a scene. Needless to say, the visual language and cinematography of a film is not something anyone is ever concerned about with a Ridley Scott film, for the most part. And the same can be said for massive set pieces. Anyone who is familiar with a Ridley Scott production knows that when he makes a film, especially one that requires a massive set design, he doesn't reach for the blue and green screen to make it happen. He tries to build everything he can get away with building.
When we arrived and saw the set build there, and I remember just being completely floored at the fact that they built ancient Rome.
I think Ridley is one of the only filmmakers that can get things built this size.
This set is really the size of a small town. There's an uptown and a downtown, several back streets. There's the bad neighborhoods.
I want to build them bigger and bigger. We worked out it was cheaper to build a set than to use blue screen. Each time you add blue, it means money. There would be some element of blue in almost every frame of this film, so what you see is real, and none of it is blue screen. And that claim by Ridley Scott will be interesting in the coming days to see if that is actually true and they didn't actually use any blue or green screen, as a lot of directors like to claim that and then end up using it in some place. But just like last time, they would set out to build a large chunk of the Colosseum and likely, based on what we can see here, filled the rest of it out through VFX in post-production. This is fairly similar to what they did in the first Gladiator, though likely a lot of different processes this time around. But for the construction of this Colosseum, which was the size of about 1 football field and 2 stories high, it was actually built much higher than the first Gladiator for a very specific reason. Arthur Max, the production designer who has worked with Ridley Scott on countless films over the years, including the first Gladiator film, noted the differences, saying the main entry arch in the first movie was about 20 feet high. In the sequel, it was a little more than 30 feet high to accommodate the ship that had to come through with its full mast and sail. Yep, you heard that right, large enough to sail a ship into. Ships that Ridley Scott wanted to make as large as possible for a different scene. Ridley wanted 250-foot ships coming in towards this wall where a huge battle is taking place, said special effects supervisor Neil Corbould, but there was no water there. To solve this problem, they would put these massive ships on top of hydraulic building movers to move them around. The rest, of course, would be added in by ILM, the sails, water, even the sky was digitally replaced for this particular battle. But going back to the Colosseum, they would employ a similar approach to building out the ships again to fit inside the arena. Ridley Scott was fairly obsessed with this historical account of it actually being flooded, and of course took it to another level by adding tiger sharks into the mix, something that was definitely not historical. But for some of the water shots, they would build a chunk of the arena back in a soundstage in LA that had a water tank. And then, of course, they didn't actually flood the practically built Colosseum, as cool as that might have been to attempt. Bringing back, of course, the hydraulic building movers again to move the ships around. Of course, 8 cameras and massive sets are not enough for a good swords and sandals film. You also need to prepare your main actors and hundreds of extras to fight. Ridley Scott, of course, had an answer for this and found a regimental sergeant major to get everyone into shape. And though Pedro Pascal has been part of many intensive and physically demanding productions, this one was a bit of a challenge. I used to be able to wake up and do that stuff, but things have changed, and so I knew I wanted to be able to do those things. So I trained and rehearsed, obviously a lot, to be able to do it. Production would wrap up on January 17th, 2024, and the mad dash to finish the film for its November 22nd or November 15th, if you live in the UK, release date was on. The jury is still out on how this film will be perceived by both critics and audiences alike. Will it be a revival of sorts for Ridley Scott or another recent dud? Tell us what you think below in the comments. Be sure to check out our whole series on the Gladiator films right here. Or also check out this really cool video on Interstellar.